kind of important day, sad day, powerful day, etc., to talk about voting rights in our. The way of voting is wrong. Especially in this country, we have been living in a gaslit environment of fraud and stolen elections, which is not true. Not true. And all these bills start coming forward in a different name that is false. And all it does is keep people from the ballot. I got to say, I love working with students. You belong here. We belong here together. And it's important to fight for your rights together to make sure you have access to the ballot, because you have the power to change history. And that's what's got people scared. So together today, let us unite and fight for their rights to the ballot to vote with no restrictions.
Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor Wilson. I am a student at Boise State University studying political science. I am also a student leader as the president of the Young Democrats at Boise State. In 2019, I served this legislative body as a Senate page. Although I would like to come to the Capitol under positive circumstances, unfortunately, since 2019, every time I have had to come back to this place has been due to thoughtless, misleading, or downright discriminatory legislation that this body has attempted to pass. Scott Herndon, when speaking on behalf of House Bill 124, the student suppression bill, stated that there was no burden being added to students by passing it because they can just use the affidavit. Not so ironically, the very same day he co-sponsors House Bill 137, which repeals the use of an affidavit. Students, make no mistake. They do not want to hear you. They do not want to represent you. They want to represent their personal interests while kicking us to the curb and making it harder for us to vote, because since 2020, students have been breaking voter records. In 2020 alone, there was an unprecedented increase in student voter turnout, which rose by 14 percentage points nationally. A similar increase was seen for the midterms, with the second highest student voter turnout in 30 years. I would also like to discuss that House Bill 124, especially in combination with House Bill 137, is unconstitutional. We should never, ever have to pay for a card to identify ourselves at the polls, because that would be considered a poll tax. We all know that most students tend to be broke, and while it may not be much money for most people, for many of us, paying for an ID would be expensive for us at this point in our lives. Fortunately, with the status quo, our school IDs are included in our student fees, making this a more accessible form of identification. My question is, if you are so concerned about parts of our voting system, why not create a better system rather than taking something away?
Yes.
To my understanding, there were also comments about how not very many people use their student IDs to vote anyway, so this legislation won't have a big impact. Well, let me tell you, I have personally used my student ID to vote in the 2020 primary, and to me, this legislation does make an impact. It does affect me, and it will affect my student community. I find it incredibly odd that for something that is allegedly so minuscule, according to some people in this legislative body, that they would even spend time on it. So, to the legislature, I invite you to stop wasting your time. I am a student, I am a voter, I am a constituent of this body. And to Senator Herndon, Representative Lambert, and every single person who voted for this lousy bill, I am a student, and I am telling you that this bill is adding a burden to us.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Caden Stone. I'm 18 years old. I'm from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, and I currently attend Boise State University studying political and environmental science. I'm also a student leader at Boise State with the ASBSU student government. You know, I remember sitting in the House gallery on February 20th when Representative Lambert presented this bill on the floor. I sat quietly, respectfully, but over the past couple of weeks, a moment from Representative Lambert's floor debate has just been playing over and over again in my head. She said, quote, "Voting is serious business." I agree, it is. So why is this group of legislators actively trying to rip it away from those who need to understand that message most? I'm a college student. This last election, I worked tooth and nail to get as many of my classmates out to vote as possible, many of which did not have a valid form of ID outside of their student ID to go vote, making many of them just decide to stay home. In hindsight, I didn't even know you could use your student ID to go vote. Most of our student population has no clue they're allowed to vote with their student ID. Now imagine, with all the great young activists and public servants that we have here today, the incredible work we can do going forward to educate these students and empower them to go out and vote. I know these students. I know they have real concerns, real values, real beliefs that they can fight for at the ballot box. When young people vote, we get a government that better represents everyone. A government that is optimistic, caring, and driven. But if this legislation passes, we lose a huge opportunity to do so. People like to point out, hey, you can just go to the DMV, pay $15 for an ID card. Now, let's be real here. No college student is going to be excited about something if it involves the DMV and paying more money than you have to. Now, in all seriousness, this is just another effort to keep young people out of the ballot box. They know colleges don't just hand out IDs to anyone. They know that students are too busy to go to the DMV. All in all, they know darn well what they're doing here, suppressing the youth vote so they can stay in power. So to my fellow Idahoans, today, I urge you, call your senator, write to the governor, and let's make sure this horrific piece of legislation does not pass so we can continue engaging young people in the government process just as we intended. Thank you.
Hello, I am Amelia Crawford, the co-founder and secretary of the politically active college community at the College of Idaho. We have all gathered here today to make our opposing voices about House Bill 124 heard. This bill is another building block to the barrier we must climb in order to vote. By removing our ability to use student IDs, you are silencing the important voices of our future. Not all students have the ability to get transportation to the DMV for a state-issued license or even the money to purchase one. Even in this privileged position, will it be enough? A dear friend of mine had both an Idaho state-issued license and a school ID. When she went to vote for the first time as a 19-year-old high school student, they accused her of using a fake ID, even though her ID was received just the week prior for this occasion. Even with her mother's testimony of its authenticity, they still refused to use it as a form of identification. In this moment of defeat and frustration, they remembered her high school ID and were able to use it to verify her identity. This young woman's voice was heard through her school ID, the very same ID that House Bill 124 will nullify. This did not happen because she was ill-prepared, but rather because her home circumstances prevented her from getting her driver's license. Yet still, she was refused at the poll based on her age and the lack of a driver's license. If she did not have her school ID, she would have been refused her right to vote that day. She would not have been granted her 15th and 19th Amendment rights. Young people like her are not the only people who would be silenced by this bill. Minorities are already underrepresented in the government and will face more socioeconomic barriers beyond what they do already. They have already faced hardships and oftentimes cannot afford the time or finances to obtain a driver's license or state-issued ID. They have the right to be heard, even if they do not have a car or other privileges people so often take for granted. Students are the future of this country, and we will not be deterred by this bill's proponents and their attempts to silence us. Thank you for your time and attention.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Samia Sarin, and I am the president and co-founder of the politically active college community at the College of Idaho. House Bill 124 would ban the use of student IDs in the voting process. The bill's proponents claim that this is to prevent voter fraud, but there are no known cases of voter fraud with a student ID in the state of Idaho. Furthermore, the claim that student IDs aren't secure is untrue. In order to become enrolled at a publicly funded school, college, or university, students must show proof of address, financial documents, their social security number, and more. At the College of Idaho, student IDs grant us access to funds, buildings, and rooms like our dorm room. Student IDs already grant us access to government institutions, so requiring another form of ID for another government institution is redundant and illogical. This bill is a non-solution to a non-issue. House Bill 124 is a gross government overreach. When 124 was heard in front of the Senate State Affairs Committee last week, Senator Lambert claimed that discouraging voters from voting was not her intent and that she was simply ensuring that only qualified voters voted. Students are qualified voters. Yes. Students without driver's licenses are qualified voters. Students facing socioeconomic barriers are qualified voters. Students in general are qualified voters, and it is not any representative's place to tell us that we're not. In my opinion, with the way the legislative session is going, students are the voters we need the most. And this bill would place barriers on the exact demographic that would vote against the bill's proponents. In the same meeting last week, Representative Herndon said in his testimony that the ban on student IDs would not be a problem for students because they could simply sign an affidavit to vote. He neglected to mention that he is sponsoring a bill which would ban affidavits for voting. This was a blatant attempt to mislead the public and a blatant attempt to suppress young voters. As a young voter, this is terrifying. House Bill 124 is a threat to our democracy, our freedom, and the values that this country was based on. We should be encouraging young voters and voters in general to vote. Not only does this bill make the voting process more difficult for groups that already face barriers to voting, but it sends a very clear message. The legislature does not want to represent young people, and they do not value what they have to say. I hope they can see from today that we cannot be silenced. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Kaylee Peterson, and I'm the president of the Idaho Young Democrats. Today, I'm here, and I listened to the 4 students' testimonies on how House Bill 124 would affect them and their lives. But then I also remembered that this is just a fraction of the tens of thousands of students in Idaho that rely on not just their student IDs, but their student life to be happy and enjoy their life here in Idaho. Make no mistake, Idaho elections have a proud history of being safe and fair. There is no evidence of voter fraud or student IDs being used in a way that would make our elections less safe. However, it is not the first example of the Idaho legislature offering up solutions to non-problems. Yes. And only by doing this have they whittled away at the constitutional rights of every young adult in this state. And they've impacted the one issue we do have with our elections. That is the accessibility of this election and the political process to young adults in Idaho. We have to start engaging young adults and giving them a place at the table so that their voice can be heard in finding solutions, not just for their life, but for their future and their families' lives. This bill is just another excuse to attack the fundamental rights that we've seen in the last 2 years, and that is that students have begun showing up. Young adults have finally started to feel engaged in the political process. And Senator Herndon and Representative Lambert have only introduced this bill in order to silence those efforts. So today, I implore you, reach out to your legislator, your senators, and most importantly, to Idaho students, college students, those about to turn 18, get registered to vote so that when issues like this come to the table, your voice is heard, and they cannot stop you from going to the polls. Thank you.